You're listening to I Spy. My name's Michelle Stevenson. I'm here with David Callan, and this week we have a special guest, and I don't know who's more excited about it.
Me.
Maybe David?
Me.
Yeah?
Totally.
You are?
It's
Okay.
always me. I'm always excited when there's someone else to talk to.
I'm excited there's someone else to talk to, believe
Exactly.
me.
I mean, of course you are. And because today we're talking about climate change.
Okay. You're listening to I Spy, the carbon credit of Australian intelligence. What's going on?
Yeah, it's looking great.
Okay, can I have a hit?
Right now, everyone might say, climate change, what's that got to do with spies and espionage and intelligence and all that sort of thing? It's a big issue. So we decided to get in one of the experts on this area, renowned around the world for his knowledge and what he does. I would like to welcome to the podcast Dan Ilic.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me. I am an expert.
Are you?
Because there is I can tell you,
Yeah.
there's a website that ranks all the climate tweeters and how they are in like the power tweeting ranking when it comes to tweeting about climate change. And I am 10th on that list of all the people in the world, just under Elon Musk and just above Greta Thunberg.
Oh,
You're
there you
above
go.
Greta Thunberg. How did you manage that?
That's crazy. What? And
Yeah, I know, it's crazy.
that's insane to me. And what about like all the other, like Al Gore and like all the other hard and steadfast, climate
Al
change
Gore.
tweeters? Wasn't he like
Al Gore is 28th on this list.
20 on the
There you
list.
go.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, Al Gore's 20. Michael Mann is 32. Shell is 33. At least I'm
Shell.
beating Shell. Like, I think I'm probably tweeting more factual information about climate change than Shell is.
Yeah, I couldn't even imagine what Shell's tweeting.
Yeah, I kind of think that that's a fairly easy bar to sort of like clear,
Yeah.
tweeting more true information about it. Now, look, what I want to talk about today is the security impact of climate change, because we all know, we're worried about the fact that there's going to be droughts and there's going to be floods and there's going to be rising sea levels. I mean, for me, rising sea levels isn't a problem. I'll probably wind up living on this wonderful place we'll call Vaucluse Island. But essentially, there is a huge climate threat to security.
Yeah.
Dan, just to sort of clear some things, what is a perspective what are we looking at for climate change here with sea level rising and things like that, sort of stats? How much is it going to go up?
Coming with the stats, Dan.
Well, the stats are pretty boring, but what is going to happen are people are losing their homes.
Yeah.
And people are losing their homes all around Australia and also very close to us, our Pacific neighbours. So already you're seeing Torres Strait Islanders who are having to make contingency plans to move their entire culture out of the Torres Strait onto the mainland, and then they no longer become Torres Strait Islanders. They become people from the mainland, and that ruins their entire race, their entire culture.
Yeah.
But outside of that, in terms of security and security risk, you've kind of got every other Pacific island nation who are going to be desperate to find homes and places to live. So all around us is the immediate threat of huge amounts of human people wanting new places to live.
Yeah.
So that is an extremely, when we're talking about sea level rise, that is a huge security risk for Australia and our Defence Force. Not only are our Defence Force already significantly overstretched when it comes to tackling climate disasters and mopping up after climate disasters, as we saw in the bushfires in 2020, but they've been deployed about 20 times in the last 5 years, mopping up disasters all around the Pacific: Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu, Fiji, Solomon Islands, Cook Islands. These are places where our defence take their eye off the ball of real security matters to go and help other folks, and that's it's pretty tricky to weigh up. Climate disasters are a huge security risk for Australia.
To give you an example of what a climate disaster can cause, now we actually have a couple of examples already in our history, in our recent history. One was the Arab Spring. All right, so all the revolutions that happened all through those Islamic states, particularly in North Africa, not so successful in the Middle East, but in North Africa, that was pretty much put down to the fact that China and Russia were going through a drought, and because they were going through a drought, they weren't producing as much rice and grain, therefore they couldn't export it to those countries, therefore people were basically starving, got pissed off with their governments and decided to rebel. All right. The other example, and this is, for me, the statistics that come out of this one, was Syria. Now, Syria went through an unprecedented drought. Everybody in the rural areas moved to the cities, had no work, had no food. Bingo, you've got a rebellion again, which is still ongoing. There's a civil war going over there.
Yeah, I mean, that Syria was so interesting because it was a bunch of farmers' kids that were skylarking in the middle of the city, and the soldiers were cracking down on them. And because the soldiers cracked down on a bunch of farmers' kids who were kind of running around the city, who were homeless and just, had nothing to do because they were off their farms, off their own properties, that little moment is the whole moment the Syrian civil war, the most recent one, completely kicked off.
Now,
so that climate change is going to see more of these things happen.
And now the other thing that came out of this was the kick-on from Syria. Now, just beyond the fact that Russia now has a foothold in the Middle East and the Americans got kicked out, Donald took them home, all that sort of stuff. The population of Syria before the civil war broke out was 22.5 million thereabouts. It's currently down to about 17.5 million. Now, they weren't all killed.
Oh, my.
Most of them went to Europe. There was all of that footage of people trying to get into Greece, landing, and then literally walking through Hungary and stuff like that. That destabilised the EU, and a lot of people regard that as one of the reasons why the UK chose to Brexit. All right, we have Brexit. So essentially, a little event that occurred because of a climate issue in one country has had a knock-on effect that's walked right through Europe. So this is the thing we've got to deal with. Now, that's a fairly small little country, 22.5 million. Not a bad thing to worry about, right? It's a little one. It's not that big. Now, we have a little issue that's slightly larger, and it's called the Maritime Southeast Asia, which has a population of about 500 million. We're talking Indonesia, the Philippines, coastal Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, all of that little area. As that water starts to rise, they're going to be looking for somewhere to go. And there's this huge country just to the south that is flat, empty, and doesn't have a lot of people in it. And can you guess the name of that little country?
Antarctica?
That's the one. They're all going to move down there and get into the ice.
Makes sense.
Right?
Look, this whole idea of climate displacement really has been an issue for a very long time. And I think now we're just seeing the fallout and the repercussions from it. And I don't think that countries like Australia and Australian governments will take it seriously until it actually really affects us. At this point in time, we see more money in mining. We see more money in all the things that we're doing that help contribute to climate change. But we're not seeing the very real fallout from it. And displacement is a big fallout. Until those people start needing somewhere to live and start looking towards Australia as a country that essentially they should be in, then we're not really going to change anything.
Yeah, essentially, and this is the point that's being made by a lot of scientists, is the situation that's going on. The heating oceans, as the oceans warm, the fish around the tropics are going to move south, right? We're going to have the degradation of coral reefs. We've already seen that up in Queensland. But as it gets warmer, the fish move south. That means the fishermen aren't going to be bringing as much stock in. That's one of the major sources of protein for the maritime Southeast Asia. And then soybean protein, which is the other major source of protein, it's also going to get knocked around by climate change as well. So the big issue we've got is, great, Sydney's going to become tropical, and the fish are going to move down to around our coastline, but the problem being is the people that want it are going to come with it. Now, the other thing is, as you said, our government isn't taking it seriously. Interestingly enough, when Joe Biden got into office, he has made climate change a critical part of the decision-making process for every government department in the US, right? And in fact, I think it was October this year, the DOD sent out their little flyer. They sent out their thing, the Department of Defence Climate Risk Analysis. So DOD have got their climate risk analysis paper out, and basically it says this is a massive problem. Now, the interesting thing is there's not a lot about mitigation in there. It's all about resilience. They're not looking at, like DOD, and it'd be the same in Australia, DOD and our intelligence services understand the risk, but their job isn't to actually mitigate the risk. Their job is to work out how to be able to act inside that threat portfolio. So this is the problem we've got. The Americans, they want to do something about it, but they can't, right? The DOD can't. In Australia, it's a totally different story. There's a great article that came out where Cheryl Durant, who was the climate specialist for the DOD, was told not to use the words climate change in any of her reports. Despite the fact that it was her job to talk about how Australian defence and security respond to it, she was told not to use it, right? Not to use climate change. Can you guess why? The words from the DOD were simply politically unacceptable. Right?
That's the new enemy. We're gonna fight climate change.
Yeah.
You got to fight fire with firefighters.
Exactly, right? Now, in the security sphere, this is the big problem. I mean, Indonesia, that's a population of 225 million, and that is one of the countries most at threat in the world. I mean, we certainly look at things like the Pacific Islands. They're in a great deal of threat. But Indonesia itself, that's 225 million people. And let's say like 10% of the threatened coastline on the planet is Indonesia.
But Indonesia is also doing the deforestation. They've got like massive issues with just them burning hundreds of hectares. And I remember when I was a few years back when I was over in that area, and just the smoke from bushfires. Yeah. When I was in Malaysia, you could see the smoke from the bushfires just permeating everywhere just because of the deforestation.
Now, I mean, there is that point that, what Indonesia are actually doing themselves isn't helping, but...
Well, yeah, I mean, we've got to really have an understanding that a lot of these countries don't have an understanding of what even recycling is, or how to even tackle climate change in their own backyard.
Which brings us to the great point of the other main security issue coming out of climate change is the fact that it's the impoverished nations that are going to be of great concern because they don't have these programs in place. Their people are impoverished. And on top of that, as soon as these nations destabilise, that's when other nations can start using these failed states or destabilised states as proxies, or they can use it as land grabs. I mean, the interesting point is someone said...
I, for one, am looking forward to the day when Australia invades New Zealand. There's some great property there that...
I think we've always been open to the idea of invading New Zealand. It's just no one wants to go.
Oh, they've got a really good film industry, better than ours.
I love it, but no one really wants to move there.
Oh, God, man. Okay.
It's good skiing.
Oh, well.
Dan hasn't left his bunker for 2 years.
It won't be good skiing anymore, will it, really? Because of climate change, everything's going to melt.
Yeah, there's no skiing there now.
Isn't there?
No, there is. Of course there is. It's a joke, mate.
Oh, I wish you hadn't said that, because that could have then gone, holy shit, it's moving even faster than I thought. Right, so essentially there's an interesting thing, and it came out of the Department of Defence climate risk analysis, was one of the things they're really worried about, is the fact that with changing rainfalls, rivers are going to change. Now, rivers are borders, right? So say the Mekong River, the Nile River, all of these rivers, as they change, these countries are going to go, well, the river's moved over there and the river is the border, therefore we've gained this land. This is going to, again, particularly in places like Africa, it's going to destabilise the political situation. And we're going to be the ones that have to kind of correct this. Now, this, again, comes down to the fact is, stop burning coal, stop burning oil, put a solar panel up and basically start paying attention and taking the issue seriously. Dan, when the government talks about newfangled technology, what sort of newfangled technology might they be talking about?
Well, they're talking about real kind of hypothetical modern art pieces like carbon capture storage, which is essentially a sphincter in the ground for gas. And they're talking about, technology like that. Yeah. So it's like technology they've already poured billions and billions of dollars into that hasn't really reliably worked anywhere around the world. And they're still pinning hopes on it. This is kind of in stuff like clean coal as well. It's a whole bunch of technology that will allow Australia to keep exporting fossil fuels, to keep burning huge amounts of fossil fuels, but also mitigating the emissions by saying they're going to capture an X amount. But unfortunately, those technologies, the technology in this whole technology, not taxes kind of lie, doesn't actually exist or work. No. So that's kind of the issue there. So it's a real strange kind of thing. There is technology to lower emissions, and it's called renewable energy. There is technology to get rid of emissions out of households, and it's called electricity. And you can replace everything that is gas with heat pumps and induction, and you can turn grids into smart grids and put batteries on every pole in Australia.
Yep.
and turn the suburbs into generative sources of electricity, and turn your cars into batteries to run your houses and things like that.
I think the issue being is really we're trying to make a magic pudding out of this, or at least our government is trying to create a magic pudding where no one gets hurt, right? And the problem really is we're all going to get hurt. We're all going to get financially hurt. And you know what? We should actually accept the fact that there is the potential to correct this.
Dave, there's actually a huge crossing over point, and that is in the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
So technology for batteries in particular are dropping so fast that by 2025, batteries, it's going to be like if you are a middle-class Australian and you don't have a battery on your house, you'd be mad not to get one by about 2025 because the cost of batteries will just plummet.
Yeah.
And so you've kind of got this amazing tipping point which is happening right now. So when it comes to that kind of energy, domestic settings, which makes up about 30% of emissions for Australia, that is ready to change. Like we can turn our castles into electrified castles. What the problem is right now is our main competitive advantage when it comes to economy is that our economy has been built and has been bolstered by the government and is subsidised hugely by the government, is just around fossil fuel extraction and exporting. And to give you an idea, like to put it into like perspective, people always say, "Oh, but Dan, we're only like 1.3% of emissions, Dan. What are you going to do? You're going to make some jokes about China and India too, Dan? You're going to do that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I can make jokes about China and India because the gas and the coal that we export goes to China and goes to India and actually has a tangible effect in the sky." So recently I've been running this huge campaign to get billboards around the world to shame the Australian government into kind of taking more climate action, including a gigantic one in Times Square. And my friend from Korea, Joe, he reached out to say g'day, and he saw this happening. He said, "A side note, Korea has had the best air quality in 6 to 7 years over the last few months due to the Australia versus China conflict situation."
Oh, wow.
I always had reservations when fully blaming China for our air quality. It turns out it was 100% them. I know it's not the best situation for my Aussie friends, but it's been a true blessing for us to be able to breathe well. This is my friend Joe in Seoul, and then sent me this incredible picture of his blue skies in Seoul. If you've ever been to Seoul, I've been there a few times. I've never seen blue sky in Seoul. I've only seen it look like London. And that's our coal. Australian coal is in the air in China and in India, and we need to be responsible for that. We need to acknowledge that those molecules shouldn't be dug up and should remain in the ground if we're going to do anything.
Well, also there's this whole idea of us digging it up and shipping it overseas, but then kind of cheating ourselves out of the usage of it, like gas in particular. We've sold it to everyone else at a very low price point.
Yeah, Michelle, this is the craziest thing.
I know, we're paying so much money for it.
I don't know if you know what happens to our gas. Our gas goes on a boat in Gorgon in Western Australia and then gets shipped to Japan. It gets offloaded in Japan and then gets re-put on a boat and brought back into the east coast of Australia.
It's so weird. And then we pay double for it.
Yeah.
So it's like I don't understand. People don't understand how crazy the whole situation is and how the government has done us out of like having and owning the natural resources that we have and we should be using ourselves.
Yes.
So instead of selling it off to a price.
Selling like particularly Howard made that gas deal, and then the Rudd government tried to get that super mining profits tax in, which was to enable us to move to a cleaner renewable energy economy sooner. Then Abbott got in and axed that tax. So, or Gillard got in and axed that tax rather. So what we're seeing is constant battle over the last 15 years where good idea gets killed, good idea gets killed, good idea comes up and gets killed in a cycle of about 23 times. And the whiplash is exhausting.
Do you think, though, that we have reached a point now where people aren't so flippant in allowing governments to kind of brush the climate conversation under the rug?
I think so. I think what you're going to see this election coming up is a real hard race run by Conservatives in Conservative seats against climate independents who will also be quite socially conservative but incredibly progressive when it comes to the environment. So I think that's super exciting. So all the folks like, Simon Holmes, the Court, C200 and your Kylie Tinks and people like that who are running conservative independents in conservative seats but are centred around not only a federal ICAC but climate action. And that's going to be super interesting. And at this moment, This is what's so exciting about this election coming up. It is not only is this election coming up, one of the most important elections in the history of the world, because it'll determine just how many gigatons of coal get shipped up and exported and sent around the world and be burnt into our skies. But it is a very important one for Australia. This one could actually provide a short circuit for fossil fuel donations to the two major parties. So where we're at now is the two major parties, both Liberal and Labor, they get paid about the same amount of money from the big fossil fuel companies, your Santos's, your Chevrons. They pay them about the same amount. But also, when you look at the lower house, there's only one seat in it for the Liberal Party in terms of having the majority. So if there's 2 or 3 climate independents that take away seats from either Labor or Liberal, what you'll have is a position where both major parties will be forced into minority government and will be forced, in order to get supply, pass serious, meaningful climate action, and then we can short circuit the fossil fuels. And I think that's so exciting to me right now.
Sounds like
Hopeful.
utopia.
I mean, that as well. I mean,
It sounds like Michelle, you say that sounds like utopia.
Yeah.
How many seats does the Liberal Party have in the lower house that they're leading by?
No, not much at all. Yeah, I know.
One.
It's just the whole idea that there would be, I think it was more the whole idea that there'll be meaningful climate change debate. Like, I think that...
Yeah. But the thing is, you can do it. If you get rid of fossil fuel funded parties,
100%.
you can do it. And that all you need is, right now, if everything was to roll the same as the last election, 2
Yep.
seats.
Yeah.
You just need 2 seats. So it's really exciting.
Yeah.
I'm
I can
excited.
tell.
personally, I think it'd be a great idea to get it on the table, because at the moment we have a Department of Defence that is facing real problems. Our security is at threat because, it may not sound like much to most people, but the hang time for a fixed wing or rotary aircraft is vastly reduced because of the rising temperature. Right, there's things like that. Naval operations, if you're going into storms, it's very hard to resupply a naval flotilla at sea if it's under stress because of weather conditions. And weather conditions are not improving. The great thing was there was a very interesting thing that was sent by our friend Neil Fergus. I was talking to him about it. In Queensland, out of the 77 LGAs up there, the local government areas, 53 have experienced 3 or more major disasters in the last 3 years. So what used to be that once in a century event is becoming a once in a decade event and is soon to become a once a year event. So this is the problem we have. It's something we need to address because our domestic security is threatened by it. Our international security is threatened by it, and we have a very boutique little defence department. It's a small army for a big country, not a big population, but a big landmass. And the fact is, if it's being overstretched trying to deal with things like coastal flooding in Australia or around our neighbours, this is a thing that's going to take us away. It undermines our security. So climate change isn't something that you can just brush off as being a lefty issue, as a lot of people like to think so. It's an issue that affects absolutely everybody in the country, from even if you're living on the top of a mountain, your security is at threat.
Yep.
And speaking of security at threat, if you're in the Liberal National Party, your security is at threat too, because more Australians than ever want our government to do more on climate action. It's 70%, the latest poll from ACF. Incredible survey they ran 2 months ago, and you could see as soon as that survey landed, you saw the rhetoric from your Dave Sharmas and your Trent Zimmermans and your Jason Falinskis all suddenly changed. It's like they went from, we don't need a net zero by 2050 to, we care deeply about climate change.
And then they voted against Daly Steggall talking about it in Parliament. So, yeah, we do have an issue which we have there is vested interest that is blocking a lot of the stuff that needs to be done.
Just a quick question, though. What are the thoughts on nuclear energy? Because I know there's a lot of conversations about nuclear and nuclear power being like a clean energy and a clean power, and why do we not? Specifically because, our resources.
The only thing that nuclear energy has against it is cost.
Yeah.
So for the same amount of price of one nuclear thing, you can get gigawatts and gigawatts and gigawatts of renewable
See, that's
power
so
for the
interesting.
same
So
price.
is it the pundits who fully support nuclear energy would probably be those same people who'd be so against renewables, but would have no idea about.
Yeah, that's it. Because Australia, I don't know if you realise, is actually run by people who dig shit up and send it overseas.
Yeah.
That's who Australia's run by. I thought we covered this.
Yeah, we did.
So, so there's no benefit. No one owns the sun. No one owns the wind. So there's absolutely no benefit.
I'm not going to make a problem. Now, the interesting thing
But
is...
let me tell you, there is a serious opportunity here, though. I don't know if you've heard this incredible project called Sun Cable out in Darwin. This is a gigantic solar array that is sending electricity offshore through high density voltage cables from Darwin through the waters of Indonesia to Singapore. Singapore is going to buy electricity, is going to buy sunshine from Australia. That's what's happening. That's being built. That has been all approved. Indonesia signed off on it just 3 weeks ago. And that is the opportunity here. The opportunity is to not be an 100% renewable country, which is a great goal. The opportunity is to be an 800% renewable country, to ship our sunshine, to ship our wind in the form of ammonium, hydrogen overseas. So replace gas with hydrogen, and we've got an incredible export opportunity.
We are the
My brother and I, one night, sitting there drinking a bottle of whiskey, we came up with our plan was if we were going to run for Parliament, our plan would be everyone's going to take a slight economic bath for 10 years while we basically solar up every building in the country, right? Place these panels on every roof. So again,
that's happening, mate. We don't need. There is no pain point.
Really?
We just need to move.
But I
No.
I had a friend who had a startup, and it was solar, and basically he was selling solar panels to put in roofs, like so apartment blocks would have them, and then whoever owned the apartment block would then sell the electricity to the owner of or the person who was residing in that apartment, even though they may have owned the apartment and owned the electricity. So it became like this whole profitable situation, but also, you know, clean energy. But it just didn't work. And the big gas companies were trying to buy him because, you know, all of a sudden they get very threatened by things that might seem a little bit better for the environment and might be cheaper to run. So it's just, I think commercially we've got a real issue as well. And I think it's not just governments, it's commercial entities that really need to come together.
Oh, definitely. It's a commercial issue, simply on the point, as Dan said, no one owns the sun. I mean, I love the fact that there's a lot of research going into fusion reaction as a power source. Well, there is a massive fusion reactor and it's only 8.5 light minutes away and it shines on us every day and we should be harvesting all of it. We've got a massive flat continent. Most of it is desert. It gets lots of sunshine, and yet Germany, I think, is outstripping us for solar power. And Germany is not like Australia.
The Germans are great at environmental stuff. Like they're across it.
There's a real opportunity for community-owned power right now. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the Hepburn Community Wind Farm in Victoria. This is an incredible system where they bought 2 wind farms back in I can't remember, I think like 2010 they bought like their first wind farm for $9.8 million. 2,000 local investors who lived around Hepburn Springs all chipped in $9 million, and then some other government grants came in as well, and they own 2 wind turbines that they own, the community owns, the residents own, and they are an exporter of energy to other towns and to the grid, and the entire town is powered by these. So
it has its own grid.
And so it's totally amazing. Like we mentioned about solar on people's roofs, Australia has the highest uptake of solar than any other country on our own roofs. But a lot of the problem comes down to the network. The network is incapable of moving that energy around. Yeah. So these energy companies have got these community batteries which are being installed. They kind of look like a box on the side of the street, and it's going to be taking during the daytime people's solar out of their roofs and putting it into this box to be used at night time. It's super exciting, and I think what is letting us down is at a local government. Everyone's working towards serious net zero targets. At a state government, everyone's working towards serious net zero targets. The only people who are letting us down are the big dogs at the top. Is the federal government.
Well, I feel like that's a good place to leave it. And also, you've left us with a little bit of optimism, I would say, Dan. A little bit of optimism.
You've left me with a lot.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, all we have to do is vote in 3 more climate independents, and then we'll have then we'll take the fossil fuel donations out of Parliament, and we'll short circuit them, make a whole bunch of shareholders really angry, like Jenna Reithart.
Yes.
And then the people will be able to come back and own our own Parliament and decide how we can actually make electricity for ourselves.
And
I'm going to call the Queensland government and see if I can get some carbon credits going on, because I didn't realise I could do that.
You should. You absolutely can do.
Sweet.
And what's more, Dave, you can get more carbon credits for planting more trees on your property as well.
Well, do marijuana plants count? Because that would be a double bonus for me.
To be honest, I just want the environment to go to shit, because then all of a sudden my property becomes a waterfront property.
No. You will just be the shoreline of Vaucluse Island, as I said before.
But for how long, Michelle?
How long? Thanks for joining us.
Are you in Scum Valley, Michelle? Is that where you are?
Yeah, totally.
You know, that's below the tsunami line in Bondi. You realise that?
Don't tell everyone where I live. It's fun.
Where are you, Ben Buckler?
Oh, sorry.
Now everyone's going to come stalk me.
That's right. People know where I live. I've had people take my photo through this window and tweet at me.
You literally live in a bunker. That's all I know. For the last 2 years, you've been in a bunker. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate your insights on climate change. Keep fighting the good fight. You're doing really well. You're taking one for the team. You're really going out there and you're creating change, and I think that's really important.
I don't know if I'm creating change, but what I will say is when at 9:45 last Thursday, when Scott Morrison wasn't going to go to Glasgow, those billboards went up in New York City, and then by 2:45 he was. Look, could have been me, could have been the Queen. I don't know. You know, it could have been Matt Keane or Dominic Perrottet saying you don't have to quarantine anymore. But hey, we're all going to do our part. This is the whole thing, Michelle and David, is we all have to use our power to affect change in the best way we can.
Use our power to change power.
Yeah. Use our power to fuck those cunts.